Okay, everyone, let's work through now the journal entries, which I believe are part 2 of the problem, or requirement number 2, where we're going to prepare some summary entries relating to this problem. Alright, so let's start right here, and let's first do the entry that will show the purchase of raw materials. Well, this is a relatively easy entry to make. We get the information from the problem. There was 500,000 raw materials purchased, right? Okay, so let's show that. We probably made it on account, so on open account, so the credit would be to accounts payable. Let's look back and see if we have that information. Raw material purchases of 500,000. It appears right to the left of my mouse there. Okay, then also on May 31st, we use some direct material. Well, let's show the goods in process inventory. Now, I've typically seen this called work in process, and in a process environment, we may have one account per department, if you will. So let me copy this and show the weaving and the sewing. And how do we come up with that amount? Well, the goods in process that we used for weaving would come from that number, and this one would come from that 75,000 appearing right there, right? And that would flow out of the raw materials inventory account. So I will sum these two numbers right there. Okay, that's how we compute that one on May 31st. Then transaction C asks us to record the transaction to show how used indirect materials were used. So let's go to May 31st. Oh, that's right, it's going to format it as a date. Let me change that here. And what we will do is show that used material flows to factory overhead. And it would also come out of raw materials inventory if that's the initial holding tank for it, which is fairly common. And how much are we talking about here in used materials? Where's our indirect materials? Right there, 120,000, appearing to the left of my mouse. So we'll show that for 120,000. Okay, just for demo purposes, you should on the third line below your transaction indicate what the entry's for. I'm going to skip that today just because it takes time to type and slows down the demo a bit. But you really should on the third line indicate what every entry is for. Okay, then on May 31st, we also want to record the payroll costs. So here we would debit an account probably called factory payroll. It's part of an overhead account as well, and credit cash for the payroll. There's lots of ways to record this entry, but this is probably the most direct. Okay, now how much is the factory payroll? There it is to the left, 3060. See it right there? So now I'll flip back over and we'll enter that. Okay. Okay, now we're going to run out of room, so let me slide this a little bit so you can, I'll move it up a little bit. You can see where we're at, leaving the problem solved from part 1 in front of us. Alright, the next we want to record the direct labor used. Now this one, let me slide back down, see if we can get the raw materials one. Okay, this one is going to look a lot like this entry, so why don't I copy it to start with, just to save some time. And instead of raw materials, dealing with used direct labor, the credit is going to be the factory payroll account, which was, if you will, the holding account for payroll. And then let's see what the dollar amounts are. There it is, $1,002,000 and $360 for the weaving and sewing department. So used $1,002,000 of direct labor and $360. Oh, and we could also pull the number right from here, right? In a lot of these, we could take that number from above. And there's the $360. And then the factory payroll would be the sum of that, right? So our debits will always equal our credits. All right, I'm going to have to slide a little bit or we're running out of room. All right, now let's do, we've recorded factory payroll, we've recorded the direct labor, we've recorded indirect labor, or have we? Nope, we haven't recorded indirect labor, so let's cover that one. Boy, I keep making that same error in formatting. Okay, now indirect labor is going to be, again, a debit to factory payroll, or excuse me, factory overhead this time, because indirect labor, we won't use a temporary holding account, if you will. We will instead debit factory overhead and take, and credit the factory payroll. The entry above covered all factory payroll, whether it was direct or indirect. And the dollar amount of the indirect labor used is, I think it's $1.5 million. Let's go back and see if that's given to us. Yep, there it is, indirect to the left, $1.5 million. Well, that's not part of the solution above, so we'll take it from the problem. Okay, time to slide a little more. What about incurred other costs and overhead? Let me date that one. Well, I think the problem said we had some other costs we incurred as well that we would charge to factory overhead, and the credit would be to other accounts, and these could be various accounts, right? It could be from accounts payable, it could be from other accounts as well. And the dollar amount of other account used, right there. Other accounts is credited. Okay, so for brevity purposes, we're not really showing what that was. In my experience, other overhead accounts, those other accounts really would be accounts payable. You purchase something from somebody else. There could be some other accounts involved, but usually accounts payable. And there it is, $156,000. So that one will go on the books at $156,000. Makes sense, right? All right, now let's apply overhead using the predetermined rates. Okay, well, applying overhead means we need to charge it to our WIP account. So I'm going to copy from here, copy the date from here, get this going here. And since we're applying overhead, the credit is going to be from our factory overhead account. I'll format that over. Okay, does that make sense? We've been, if you will, debiting factory overhead. And now we have to take the money out of the factory overhead account and apply it using a predetermined rate. Well, what's the predetermined rate? We have that from above, right? 960 for the weaving and 540 for the sewing. So we take it out at $1.5 million, right? Now we've applied it to the work in process. All right, now let's slide again a little bit, give you a little bit more room. And let's talk about transferring the products from the weaving to the sewing. Okay, now this is a real straightforward one. We're talking about a WIP to WIP transfer, so that's all that's involved. Oh, and I've got this reversed. We go from weaving to sewing, so the credit will come out of the weaving department. The debit goes to the sewing, and what's the dollar amount? Well, we've already calculated it. It's that total transferred to sewing. So we could take it from here and take that from there. And we've got the debits and credits for that entry. All right, we've just got a couple more to go. Oh, excuse me. Went a little bit too far. Now we need to show the transfer of the completed products from the sewing to finished goods. Okay, well, we know we're going to have a credit from sewing, and I would imagine we're going to have a debit to finished goods. Makes sense, right? So now we're showing the transfer from, this is a process cost flow. All right, and we've calculated that amount is the 32105 above. We can take it right from there. Take it from there as well. And we've taken care of that transfer. So we constantly have this, if you will, debiting of where we accumulated the cost. Then based on new information, we determine the total and transfer it to the next process down the line, which is usually a department. Okay, 2 more entries to go. Now we sell the finished goods, and you guys all know this entry, right? Assume it's sold on open account. So the debit is to accounts receivable, credit is to sales. And we're going to assume we're under a perpetual system. So we're also going to have the entry to cost of goods sold and the credit to finished goods inventory. And I'm going to just grab this from here rather than typing it. Credited here. They give us in the problem that the sales were made for $4 million. Cost of goods sold, of course, we know that from what we've calculated above, so I can pull it from here. And those are all the problems that we had related to this demo problem. Now, I'll let this demo end. I'll walk up a little bit so you can see all the various entries. I'll slide down little by little. Okay, so we tackled quite a bit of entries here. And the only thing that I didn't do was drop in the descriptions, which you would put right here, like this one would be purchased raw materials. Okay, if I can type it. And ideally, you would put this, underneath every entry. This one would be to show direct materials used, and so forth. And you really do want to put this under every entry. But to do them all will take too much time. Okay, that was the problem. We've solved them. Thank you, everyone.